Dominic is giving me the microphone because I think he was so inspired by Aaron when he heard his story. It was just a real personal connection. Dominic, for years, in fact, most of his life, has been a serious outdoor adventurer. He climbs big mountains, he climbs big walls, he descends rivers. And I think at the end of the day, he felt puny compared to Aaron when he saw what Aaron was capable of achieving in his life. And he said, wow, when I see that story, I recognize its power, and I want people to see that too.
I actually met Aaron originally it was 2011 or 2012.
Oh, originally in 2011.
2011. So I was crossing the country on a tandem bicycle, accompanied by various people with disabilities that prevented them riding a bicycle on their own. And we actually, for that journey, which was a television series on Universal Sports, cast the net far and wide to find people that would benefit from taking part in that adventure. In that process, we came across Aaron, who was already way down the recovery line, was training for the Paralympics. But to his credit, he came out on our first day from Santa Monica Pier inland and rode his own tricycle in show of solidarity with us and accompanied us. So we got to know him there. He had a little cameo role on that TV series, and we kept in touch and made a short film about him, about his training for the Paralympics, and that did like gangbusters in short film festivals, and we realized that there was a much bigger story to tell. Actually, various filmmakers in the past had tried to make, I believe, feature-length documentaries about Aaron, but as anyone that's tried to make a feature film knows, it is a process that has a high likelihood of failing for whatever reason. Funding, time, life getting in the way. So for one reason or another, many films had false starts and never quite got off the ground.
We had a couple of different beginnings to the film. And we knew we wanted to start with the walk right away. I mean, telling this in a linear version, it just seemed like we would take so long, and then the last 30 minutes of the film would be straight walking. And the walk is slow, and we needed people to stay engaged with it. And, watching 30 minutes straight of that just seemed like a recipe for failure. And at the same time, we knew it was one of the most aesthetically interesting parts of the film and actually had a lot of charisma and power of its own. So we decided to break the walk up into the spine or the backbone that we would then dip in and out to tell Aaron's story. So once we kind of, had that structure nailed down, the question was, what scene are we going to put at the beginning? And we tried a couple that were perhaps more provocative, but they didn't test well. People felt that they were gimmicky, and in the end, we said, well, let's just use the lines where he's kind of explaining to a third party what he's doing, because it's still kind of mysterious, but it draws you in immediately.
One of the biggest challenges we had, because Aaron is so incredibly capable relative to his injury, was convincing people that he was heavily compromised. His system is still heavily compromised physically and neurologically. So I knew that, and I actually took that for granted to a certain extent. And we found, as we edited more and more, we realized that a certain amount of explaining needed to be done in the film to actually make people realize that, no, he was completely paralyzed. Mm-hmm. Aaron's mother, Laquita, is a force to be reckoned with in the best possible way. And I think it's safe to say without her support, Aaron's recovery would not be nearly as complete. She sometimes, almost delusionally, as she would say, believed in Aaron, and never took no for an answer from medical professionals or anyone else. So she is an incredibly powerful lady that insulated and did her best from that hospital bed when she came to his bedside immediately after his injury. She did her best to insulate Aaron from any negativity, so that he could at least start his recovery process in a positive environment with the best possible chance of success.
Well, I definitely think there's a movement in the last 5 years to make documentaries more cinematic, a more cinematic experience. That kind of PBS traditional style of documentaries, going out of fashion. Although some really great documentaries have been made in that style, and I certainly don't want to say that they aren't great. But I think we were very conscious of that, and we wanted to provide a cinematic experience to the viewers. So it felt like at times they were like, well, is this a documentary, or am I watching something that's been scripted? And even though it's clear it hasn't been scripted, you just get that feeling of like how the journey is woven so specifically that it just makes sense.
Well, the most polarizing message for me is realizing what we have in these two legs and putting one foot in front of the other. When you get up after 80 or so minutes of watching the film, I want people to understand how much ability they have, and with that, not to squander that ability. That's perhaps the most powerful message, and the secondary message, which is inextricably linked with that, is you think you've pushed yourself in whatever realm. It can be physical, it might be psychological, it might be your relationships. You think you've pushed yourself and done as well as you can, but there is always further. And then when you've reached that next mark, that next point of achievement, there's probably further still. So don't stop. Don't stop.
Actually, I think we have two audiences for the film. We have the broad audience and everybody who would probably be watching through your network. But then we also have a specific audience of people that are involved in injury and recovery. And one of my hopes is that there's an enormous amount of those people who get to watch the film, because I think there's a specific message for them about how to communicate towards patients. And even larger than that, there's a message about a gap in the healthcare industry that needs to be urgently filled. And that is, exercise facilities for people who have mobility impairment. And as I always tell people, there's kind of three pillars to health and wellness that able-bodied people undertake every day. And one is your nutrition, the other is your exercise, and the third is actual healthcare, like going to the doctor when you're sick. And for people with mobility impairment, 1 and 3 are within their power. They can get healthcare coverage and they can go to the grocery store and choose what they want to feed themselves. But going to a gym is just not that possible. It's really hard to go to a Gold's Gym and step on a treadmill when you can't walk, or even, smaller impairments. And so I think and there's a lot of people. I think there's over 30 million people in the last US Census reported having mobility impairment in a significant way. That's 1/3 of our country. Excuse me, not 1/3, 1/10 of our country. And so I just think that there's a huge marketplace for that, and there's a huge need, and I would like to see that filled. I mean, every time I watch the film, usually a month goes by between screenings where I actually get to, physically watch the film. And each time I watch it, I'm reminded more and more about Laquita as a mother. And I just think, for me, what I walk away with is knowing, what kind of support you can be to another person, and what a difference that makes in their life. And even though I see Erin's journey as, magical in some way, and definitely, the pillar of what we're trying to demonstrate to the world, I think the second character of Laquita, for me personally, has been very inspirational. And I just, I hold her story close to my heart.
I'm going to be cheeky and actually split that into two parts. One, during the process of the walk, as an able-bodied individual, you have a certain speed to life that you're used to, and I thought that I would become frustrated with the slow speed at which we were moving, but very quickly, somehow psychologically, I slowed down to the same pace as Erin, and that became really valuable to me. Your brain slows down, you process things differently, and I think people could benefit from doing that in the day-to-day. And secondly, in the post-production, in the edit, in the sort of analysis and dredging for story, what was very apparent to me after a while is it's the unassuming footage and strange little roll ends of tape that are not cinematic, that are not high energy, that make a person human. and I will forever look for those in future.
So the film drops on Amazon and iTunes on May 15th, and that will be widely available. I think it's also on Google Play. And we'll see, hopefully this summer it will be more broadly available on the subscription VOD service. But for now, we would love it if you would go, give it a download and on iTunes.
And a review.
Oh, and a review. Yeah, well, the cinematographer is Dominic, and I'll let him talk about that in a second. But I do definitely want to plug our composer. His name is Cody Westheimer. He also specializes, he does all sorts of indie films, but his passion and his heart is in outdoor and adventure-based films, whether it's sports or nature or wildlife, and he really focuses on that, and he's tremendously talented. And so then I'll let Dominic talk about it.
I find it very difficult to direct without a camera in my hand, just because I haven't grown up in the film industry, and I'm very drawn to creating imagery. So filming in the desert for me was something that I got a huge amount of enjoyment out of, but I realized I think I have a pretty good eye for sort of the natural world, and I try to bring that as much as I can into our stories, whatever they may be. I really enjoy being what I'd call a sort of active director, whether that be being second camera or primary cinematographer. While it's very difficult to sort of push your brain in two different directions, really involves creating a relationship very intimately with the person in front of the camera, and I feel like doing that as a cinematographer is tantamount and incredibly rewarding. So.